Sometimes human ambition defies all odds, leading to structures built in places that seem utterly impossible. From buildings perched on cliffs to communities built on tiny peninsulas, today we're counting down 15 things built in impossible locations. Starting with number 15, La Rinconada. At 16,732 feet above sea level, La Rinconada stands as the highest permanent settlement in the world. It's located in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Peruvian Andes. This remote mining town's existence is an anomaly. The extreme altitude, the freezing temperatures, and the harsh conditions makes it a place that defies logic, and its construction and maintenance are products of necessity. You'll find this place in the Junca region of the Peruvian Andes, a place where few would ever think to establish a settlement. The thin air at such high elevations makes it nearly impossible for the human body to function efficiently, and with oxygen levels dropping significantly, hypoxia, a condition caused by low oxygen, is common among residents, with at least 25% of the population estimated to suffer from it. Getting here is no easy feat. The nearest commercial airport is located nearly 2.5 hours away by car on winding, treacherous mountain roads. Yet despite the difficulties in getting there and the geography, the town has grown from a small prospector camp into a populated center driven by one factor: gold. Building a settlement at such a high altitude isn't a simple task either. The lack of infrastructure and resources means that most of the town's structures are makeshift, constructed from whatever materials are available. Many homes are built with corrugated metal, stone, and wood, materials that provide very little insulation from the cold and are susceptible to the elements. Maintaining life here is an even greater challenge. Without proper sanitation, disease runs rampant. Garbage, mostly plastic waste, litters the town, creating an environment where basic health standards are almost non-existent. The local clinic, the only one in town, is small and underfunded, providing limited care for the population, which is often exposed to dangerous conditions, including mercury contamination from mining practices. Number 14, Skellig Michael. Skellig Michael, also known as Great Skellig, is located 7.2 miles in County Kerry in Ireland. Now, this island, rising steeply from the ocean, reaches a height of 714 at its summit. Now, the remote location here makes it one of the most extraordinary places in the world to have ever hosted human life, particularly when one considers the Gaelic monastery established there between the 6th and 8th centuries. Built by monks seeking solitude and connection with the divine, this monastery was placed on a barren, nearly vertical piece of rock, in a setting so extreme, it challenges your imagination. The landscape is not only steep, it's often inhospitable, with winds that can reach hurricane force and waves that crash relentlessly. The island's lack of arable land makes farming practically impossible, and its isolation from the mainland adds a layer of danger and difficulty that few other locations on Earth can match. The highest point here, the Spit, reaches 714 feet above sea level, and the monastery itself is about 550 to 600 feet up. The steps carved into the rock centuries ago are narrow, treacherous, and exposed, making travel difficult even for modern visitors. The journey here requires ascending steep flights of stone steps that are prone to weathering, some of the landings consisting of only small platforms hewn from the stone. Constructing this monastery in such a forbidding piece of land required a level of resourcefulness that few could manage today, let alone in the 6th century. Monks had little choice but to use the island's natural resources: rock, stone, and what little earth they could cultivate. The monastery is composed of dry stone huts known as beehive huts, with roofs formed by layering stones in a conical shape to allow water to run off. Now, these huts were built on terraces cut into the rock to create level areas on which to work. The stonework is still intact, with the huts forming part of a settlement that would have housed no more than 12 monks and an abbot at any one time. Their diet likely consisted of fish, birds, and eggs, as there was very little land available for growing crops. The harsh environment here would have made everyday life a constant struggle for survival, with the cold, the wind, and limited resources contributing to a daily challenge. However, the monastery did remain a place of pilgrimage for centuries after it was abandoned as a permanent settlement. Number 13, Nail Houses. Nail houses. They're structures that are standing in the middle of construction zones, highways, or shopping malls in China, stubbornly resisting demolition despite immense pressure from developers and governments. The term nail house refers to the homeowners who refuse to vacate their properties, likened to nails that refuse to be hammered down. These structures, often perched in absurd and seemingly impossible locations, symbolize resistance against unjust compensation and forced evictions. One of the most striking examples is a nail house in Wenling in the Zhejiang province, where an entire road was constructed around a single home. The two-story building stood in the middle of a newly paved four-lane highway with traffic flowing on both sides. The elderly couple who lived there initially refused to move, claiming the compensation offered was insufficient to purchase a similar home elsewhere. For years, they endured the deafening noise of passing vehicles, isolation from surrounding infrastructure, and the looming threat of forced eviction. Ultimately, though, they accepted a settlement in 2012, but the image of their house surrounded by a sea of asphalt remains etched in public memory. When surrounded by development, basic utilities such as water, electricity, and sewage systems are often cut off. Residents have to rely on temporary workarounds such as using generators for power, carrying water in containers from nearby sources. Access to these homes can also be a physical challenge. In cases where homes are left stranded on elevated plots of land surrounded by construction pits, residents have to climb precarious makeshift ladders or traverse unstable walkways to reach their front doors. Another notable nail house stands in the middle of a 6-story shopping mall in Changsha. Instead of demolishing this property, developers built the mall around it, leaving the home awkwardly nestled in the mall's courtyard. The family living there continued to reside within the building, accessing their home through service corridors and emergency exits. Maintenance of such properties is incredibly challenging. With limited access to repair crews, any damage to plumbing, electricity, or structural integrity can go unresolved for months or years. In most cases, though, life in a nail house is an act of endurance. The physical location, lack of essential services, and social stigma can be overwhelming. Some residents adapt by running small businesses from their homes, using the increased visibility brought by their unusable locations to attract customers. Others live in quiet defiance, refusing to be displaced regardless of the hardships. Carry on. Number 12. Beijing's Hanging Home. In the heart of Beijing, amid the bustle of government buildings and universities, sits a strange and controversial creation. The 26-story Parkview building is home to an eccentric structure that defies reason. Perched atop the building is a sprawling rooftop villa built illegally by a professor. This mountaintop residence, complete with fake crags, foliage, and a yard of trees and grass, took 6 years to complete, yet it exists on a precarious perch above the city. This rooftop isn't just any top-floor extension, it's an elaborate villa covering 8,600 square feet, which adds 2 additional stories to the building. Imagine constructing a mountain on top of a standard apartment building, one that not only alters the appearance of the roof but also risks the structural integrity of the entire building. And it was done illegally, with construction happening at night to avoid detection by authorities. The fact that this project even got off the ground, let alone stayed up, is a puzzling mystery in itself. The location is insane for a variety of reasons. Firstly, the Parkview building was never designed to support the weight of this villa. The building's original design certainly didn't account for fake rocks and trees growing on the roof. Second, the area of the Haidian district is one of the most regulated zones in Beijing, home to universities and government buildings. It's an area where real estate developments are carefully controlled and permits are essential. So how did the professor manage to build such a massive structure without the proper paperwork? Well, by operating at night and ignoring complaints from neighbors, of course, and for 6 years, this grand rooftop development went unchallenged by local authorities. Heavy construction equipment, cranes, and scaffolding would normally be required to safely build anything of this size, but in this case, these tools had to be used in covert operations. Construction crews hired by the professor worked at night, often using ropes to haul materials up the building, which led to numerous complaints from residents. Some reported hearing loud noises and even seeing debris falling onto parked cars below. Number 11. Mansell Forts. Rising from the water like forgotten giants, the Mansell Forts stand as a relic of wartime ingenuity and the abandonment of the Thames estuary. These structures, part of a broader defensive network created during World War II, are perhaps one of the most bizarre and hard-to-believe constructions of their time. Located roughly 6 miles from the coastline, these forts are perched on metal stilts, with each cluster of platforms surrounding a central tower. Built to defend Britain against air raids and enemy attacks, the forts seem to defy not only logic, but also the odds of remaining in place after decades of isolation and decay. The location of these forts is nothing short of pretty crazy. The Thames estuary is known for its murky, unpredictable water, tides, and storms, making it a pretty difficult and dangerous environment for any construction. Yet in 1942, the British military decided that this is where they would build a defensive network to ward off Nazi air and sea attacks. The forts were placed on stilts, each standing more than 30 feet above the water, with the legs of their platforms driven deep into the soft seabed. The structure had to be installed in the open sea, far away from any stable land base, with extreme weather making construction pretty challenging. Workers had to install structures in the face of constant wind and waves, and some forts even experienced damage during the installation process. Each fort was constructed on land, and once the components were ready, they were floated to the site on barges. These massive metal legs of each structure were sunk into the water and then anchored in place. The forts were initially designed to house anti-aircraft artillery and crew members who lived on the fort in isolation for long stretches. The workers on these structures had to endure not only the harsh conditions of living on a swaying metal platform, but also the threat of enemy bombers and submarines. Given the location, these forts were never meant to be permanent. In fact, the forts were abandoned after World War II, and by 1950, they were no longer needed for military purposes. Over time, the remaining forts fell into disrepair. One of them, the Nor Army Fort, was destroyed after being hit by a ship and damaged by storms, leaving just 2 forts remaining, Red Sands and Shivering Sands. These deserted structures were later adopted by pirate radio stations in the 60s and 70s, but by the 2000s they were abandoned again. However, despite their decaying condition, these structures still hold a strange presence in the water, and perhaps a little bit of madness too. Number 10. The Tatev Monastery. Perched on the edge of a nearly vertical cliff, the Tatev Monastery sits like a sentry overlooking the deep, rugged gorge of the Wartime River in southeastern Armenia. To reach it today, visitors take to the Tatev cable car, which stretches over this steep ravine, offering a heart-stopping view of a 3,200-foot drop below. Yet this monastery has existed for over a millennium, built in a location that makes one wonder, how on earth did anyone manage to get a single stone to such an impossible spot? The area surrounding Tatev is not just remote, it's situated at the very edge of a massive gorge with near sheer cliffs on all sides. The river below carves through the land, creating vast, intimidating drops into the chasm. And in this hostile landscape surrounded by deep ravines and rough terrain, the idea of building anything, let alone a sprawling monastic complex, seems almost insane. The plateau itself is at an altitude of about 6,000 feet above sea level, surrounded by steep cliffs that rise up to 3,300 feet from the valley floor. One can only imagine the efforts it took to haul everything up the cliffs or across the rugged mountain passes using nothing more than primitive tools and determination. Beyond the construction, though, maintaining life on such a remote plateau presented even more difficulties. In the medieval period, travel was slow, dangerous, and often impossible due to the region's winters and rocky terrain. For the monks who lived and worked at Tatev, access to the monastery was limited to a narrow, perilous path. Even more remarkable was the fact that this monastic community thrived for centuries. The monastery was a center of culture, religion, and education during the 14th and 15th centuries, housing one of the most important Armenian medieval universities. They grew their own food, produced their own materials, and created what little infrastructure they needed to survive. The monks' existence wasn't just about surviving in a remote place. It was about thriving, preserving culture, and continuing an intellectual tradition that would last for centuries. Life here today at Tatev is still a far cry from normal. While a modern cable car provides an easier access route, it doesn't change the isolated nature of this location. The monks who once inhabited this place have long since gone, but the monastery continues to stand as a reminder of this amazing place. Number 9. Kailasa Temple. The Kailasa Temple stands in the Ellora Caves in India, carved from a single massive rock. Its location alone makes it one of the most amazing and improbable sights of ancient architecture. This Hindu temple is believed to have been built between 757 and 783 AD, under the reign of Krishna I. Now, what makes this structure truly remarkable isn't just its scale, but the sheer difficulty of carving it into a vertical basalt cliff. The Kailasa Temple is the largest monolithic structure in the world, and it raises the question, how the hell did anyone even conceive of building something like this, let alone actually complete it? Well, the temple is dedicated to Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction and transformation, and was designed to represent his sacred mountain home, Mount Kailasa. The complex sits on a high plateau, with cliffs rising sharply around it, and the site's at an altitude of roughly 2,100 feet above sea level, with dramatic rock faces that form an intimidating backdrop. The temple is carved from a single block of rock, 200,000 tons of it, according to some estimates, excavated entirely by hand using nothing but hammers and chisels. The scale and difficulty of this task would seem to be beyond the capacity of even the most advanced civilizations. Yet it was completed in just 2.5 decades, a short time in terms of temple construction. The temple also saw its share of historical conflict. During the reign of Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb in the 17th century, an attempt was made to destroy the Kailasa Temple. 1,000 workers were dispatched with the aim of dismantling it, but after 3 years of effort, the workers had only managed to cause minimal damage. Today, though, the Kailasa Temple still stands, though it's not actively inhabited. It's no longer a place where monks or priests live, and there's no permanent community here. The temple is part of the larger Ellora Caves complex, which consists of 34 rock-cut monasteries and temples that span several centuries of construction. But the Kailasa Temple itself continues to draw attention for its incredible location and its design, as well as for the mystery surrounding how it was built. Number 8. Elliday Island. Elliday Island, located about 7 miles south of Iceland's mainland, sits at the northeastern edge of the Vestmannaeyjar archipelago. At 110 acres, the island is small but rugged, defined by steep cliffs and abundance of puffins. Despite the island's harsh terrain, a solitary structure stands out, an isolated hunting lodge known for its location. Constructed in 1953 by the Elliday Hunting Association, this building has been referred to as the world's loneliest house by many. The location, perched on this remote island, presents multiple challenges, both in terms of construction and ongoing life. How does one even build a structure here, let alone maintain it? The island's steep cliffs rise sharply from the ocean, making it nearly impossible to reach by boat during rough weather. Visitors have to brave cold, treacherous waters to access the island, often using small boats to land on a narrow stretch of beach. Currently, though, no one permanently lives here on Elliday. The lodge serves as a seasonal retreat used mostly by members of the Hunting Association. When in use, individuals must brave the challenging journey to the island, which involves sailing across cold waters and climbing a steep hill to reach the lodge itself. But the myth surrounding the island as the potential residence of Icelandic singer Björk has added a layer of mystery to this location. However, the real purpose of the lodge is far less glamorous, a rustic retreat for hunting enthusiasts. There is no permanent population on the island, and while it is technically possible to spend the night there, the conditions mean that those who do have to be prepared for the stark isolation that this location imposes. Well, despite any challenges, the lodge offers a chance to experience a truly isolated existence surrounded by dramatic landscapes, the call of puffins, and an overwhelming sense of solitude. Yeah, no thanks. Moving on to number 7, Montreal's underground city. Montreal's underground city, or réseau, sprawls beneath the heart of the city, creating a web of tunnels that connects office buildings, shops, hotels, university, and transit systems. Now, at first glance, it may seem like an urban development, but when considering the impossible location of its construction, the sheer complexity of maintaining it, and the way people live and work within it, this underground labyrinth is anything but ordinary. Réseau is situated underneath one of the busiest and most densely populated areas in Montreal, the city's central business district. The site where it was first developed, at the southern entrance to the Mount Royal Tunnel, is particularly challenging because it sits on what was an open pit. This location is crazy for several reasons. First, the land here is part of the Mount Royal Range, a rocky hill that was originally difficult to develop due to its topography. Second, the city had to create underground connections while dealing with the pressures of being located in the busiest urban area of Montreal, with thousands of people above ground at all times. Finally, the fact that the city continues to grow around these underground spaces means that construction teams had to account for future development without collapsing existing structures. People live, work, and shop here every day, and the complex contains over 1,600 housing units with a vast array of stores and offices filling the tunnels. The passages had to be shielded from groundwater, and engineers had to ensure that there would be no cave-ins or flooding, two major risks in any subterranean construction. Today, the underground city spans about 20 miles of tunnels, connecting over 120 access points and servicing more than 500,000 people per day. The network's split into corridors that are fully integrated with Montreal's metro system. Now, that connection to the city's transit network is pretty crucial, as it allows for a seamless flow of people for the underground passageways to the trains and buses above. But maintaining such a vast network is a challenge. These tunnels are climate-controlled and well-lit, but frequent inspections are necessary to ensure that the underground environment remains stable. In 2007, for example, a major issue arose when a 23-foot crack was discovered in one of the tunnels. This fissure had the potential to disrupt the delicate balance of the underground space, causing partial closures while repair work took place. Crews worked quickly to shore up the structure and minimize the risk of any further damage, installing more than 1,000 metal supports to stabilize the passage. The fact that repairs could be made in such a sensitive and high-traffic area highlights the constant need for vigilance in maintaining this underground world. Number 6. Langagarb Hut. The Langagarb Hut is an unassuming structure located in the Scottish Highlands. It's located in Glenative, right next to the River Coupal, and it lies just off the A82, the main road through the valley. But while the hut itself is relatively small, its location is challenging, sitting in the shadow of one of the most formidable mountains in Scotland. It's a jagged mountain that stretches nearly 5 miles from north to south. Its steep, craggy face, particularly the towering 3,300-foot peak of Stobdarag, looms over the hut, providing a constant reminder of this harsh terrain. The entire area is known for its unpredictable weather, which can shift from clear skies to fierce storms in a matter of hours. The hut sits next to a turbulent river that can swell after heavy rains, creating potential flooding risks. Now, the challenge of building a structure here, not to mention maintaining it, is compounded by its remoteness. The A82 may provide a path for visitors, but beyond that, the access to the hut is limited to foot traffic. The hut was originally built as a crofting home, part of a small rural community that lived off the land. The crofting system, still practiced in the Scottish Highlands today, involves small farming communities where resources are shared and members rely on one another for survival. The hut's original purpose was to house crofters who would have farmed the surrounding land, tending to livestock and growing crops. The terrain here is rocky and uneven. It's also prone to sudden weather changes, including heavy snow in the winter and intense rain in the spring and fall. Over the years, the hut has undergone renovations, transforming from a modest croft house to a functional bunkhouse managed by the Scottish Mountaineering Club. This transition reflects a shift from agricultural to recreational use, with the hut now providing shelter for hikers and climbers who venture into the area to tackle the mountain or explore the surrounding glens. Number 5. The International Space Station. So, orbiting 250 miles above the Earth's surface at speeds exceeding 17,000 miles an hour, the International Space Station exists in one of the most unforgiving locations ever chosen for human habitation. The ISS occupies a narrow band of space called low Earth orbit. Now, while this might sound relatively accessible in the context of space travel, LEO is a chaotic, high-speed environment filled with risks. The station circles the Earth roughly every 93 minutes, completing about 15 orbits a day. Astronauts aboard the ISS witness 16 sunrises and sunsets every day, but the serene visuals here belie the hazards. Micrometeoroids and space debris, some no larger than a grain of sand, travel at velocities exceeding 22,000 miles an hour in this region. And at those speeds, even a tiny fragment can punch holes in critical equipment or puncture the station's outer shell. Moreover, the station exists in a partial vacuum, where temperature swings can range from 250 degrees in sunlight to negative 250 degrees in the shadow. In such an environment, there's no room for error. Constructing the ISS was not a singular event, but an incremental process spanning more than 2 decades. Massive components, some weighing more than 40,000 pounds, were ferried into orbit aboard space shuttles and Russian rockets. Once in orbit, astronauts conducted spacewalks to manually bolt segments together, connect power lines, and ensure airtight seals. Working in space is physically grueling and mentally exhausting, with astronauts spending up to 8 hours in bulky, pressurized suits to perform intricate tasks. So, despite its location, the ISS is not abandoned. It's been continuously inhabited since November 2, 2000. Typically, 6 astronauts live and work aboard the station, though its maximum capacity can reach up to 13 during crew transitions. Life on the ISS follows a tightly structured schedule. Astronauts work 10-hour days during the week and 5 hours on Saturdays. Tasks range from conducting microgravity experiments to performing routine maintenance. Exercise here is mandatory for 2 hours each day to counteract any muscle and bone loss caused by prolonged weightlessness. Sleep happens in small, phone booth-sized quarters, equipped with sleeping bags tethered to the wall. Without gravity, free-floating during sleep could result in an astronaut bumping into equipment or failing to exhale carbon dioxide efficiently. Meals are prepackaged and rehydrated with water collected, filtered, and recycled from sweat, urine, and condensation. Despite the dangers, building the ISS in low Earth orbit was a deliberate choice. This altitude minimizes fuel requirements for launches and resupply missions while maintaining proximity to the Earth for real-time communication. Additionally, low Earth orbit offers an environment of near-zero gravity, allowing scientists to conduct experiments that are impossible on Earth. From testing new pharmaceuticals to observing fluid dynamics and even growing crystals. Number 4. The Buzzard Platform. Located about 62 miles northeast of Aberdeen in the North Sea, the Buzzard Platform rises from a site few would consider suitable for human presence, let alone a fully functioning industrial hub. Sitting in waters roughly 315 feet deep, it occupies an environment defined by relentless storms. Despite these conditions, Buzzard remains one of the largest producing oil fields on the UK continental shelf. That's a critical link in the region's energy infrastructure. The outer Moray Firth isn't merely a patch of open water, it's a battleground where winds, waves, and frigid air collide with ferocity. Waves can reach heights exceeding 30 feet during storms, while gale-force winds are a regular occurrence too. Any mechanical failure or emergency evacuation isn't just inconvenient, it could be catastrophic. The seabed, though relatively stable, provides little comfort. At depths of over 300 feet, constructing and anchoring an oil platform here becomes a test of both precision and endurance. Constructing it required modular fabrication, with massive sections of the platform built on shore before being transported by heavy lift vessels. These structures were anchored to the seabed using steel piles driven hundreds of feet into the ocean floor. The connection points between the modules had to be flawlessly aligned, as even slight deviations could compromise the entire system. The platform's legs were designed to flex slightly with the movement of the sea, so absorbing any constant stress from waves and wind. Maintaining the facility is an ongoing process. Corrosion control systems, including cathodic protection and regular anti-corrosion coatings, are critical to extending the lifespan of the platform. Now, while no one lives permanently here on Buzzard, shifts typically last about 2 weeks, with workers flown in and out by helicopter from Aberdeen. Once aboard, workers find themselves in a self-contained world. The constant hum of machinery, the smell of oil and chemicals, and the knowledge that a storm could isolate the platform at any time create a persistent undercurrent of tension. Every task on Buzzard is high stakes, whether operating drilling equipment, managing chemical processes, or overseeing water injection systems for pressure maintenance. There's little room for error. Communication with onshore control centers is constant, ensuring that every decision aligns with safety protocols. Number 3. The Medieval City. The Cité Médiévale, located in Carcassonne, France, rises imposingly on a hill above the Aude River, its double-walled fortress and 52 towers casting long shadows over the landscape. However, its legacy isn't merely about stone walls and ramparts. It's about the improbable nature of its location, a place where building and maintaining a fortified city seems almost inconceivable. It's perched about 500 feet above sea level on a narrow, rocky promontory. The river curls around its base, carving steep slopes that offer little in the way of stable foundations. The hill's gradients and uneven terrain have made transporting building materials an arduous task, especially during the early phases of construction during the Roman times. To complicate matters, the citadel was nearly lost to history when rising waters from a 20th century dam submerged much of the landscape. Today, during extreme droughts, remnants of submerged structures can emerge, a haunting reminder of the cost of progress. Early Roman engineers laid the groundwork with thick stone walls, anchoring them deep into the bedrock. Towers, standing nearly 45 feet tall, were spaced evenly to create a defensive advantage, their semicircular designs helping to deflect siege weaponry. During the 13th century, an additional layer of fortifications was added under French royal authority. Builders worked with limited machinery, relying on human and animal labor to haul stones up steep inclines. Rainwater was collected and funneled into underground cisterns, while narrow, heavily guarded pathways allowed minimal supplies to enter from the valley below. Restoration in the 19th century required a near-complete overhaul of this structure. Builders had to overcome the same challenges faced by their medieval predecessors, relying on scaffolding and sheer determination. Despite the harsh setting, though, it wasn't merely a military outpost, but it was a thriving community. At its peak, nearly 4,000 people lived within the walls. Today, though, a much smaller population resides here, primarily catering to tourism. Access remains limited, while modern roads have made reaching this place easier. The final ascent to the citadel is still largely on foot. Supplies are brought in small vehicles or manually carried up cobbled streets. Life within these walls requires resilience, as the cost of maintaining businesses and homes in such an isolated historic setting is pretty high. Number 2. Coober Pedy. In the middle of South Australia's barren outback, 526 miles north of Adelaide along the Stuart Highway, lies Coober Pedy. It's known as the opal capital of the world. This remote town exists in one of the harshest environments on the planet, with daytime temperatures regularly exceeding 104 degrees Fahrenheit and annual rainfall barely reaching 6 inches. It's an environment that seems utterly inhospitable, yet beneath the scorched earth, life not only persists, but thrives. Vegetation here is scarce, and water is more expensive than fuel, piped in from a bore connected to the Great Artesian Basin. The sun dominates the sky for most of the year, baking the landscape and driving surface temperatures to extremes. Supply trucks bring food, fuel, and essentials, but these deliveries are infrequent and vulnerable to delays caused by weather or mechanical failures. Early settlers realized that the traditional above-ground structures could not stand up to the relentless heat. Instead, they turned to the sandstone hills, digging homes and shelters directly into the earth. These underground homes, known as dugouts, remain naturally insulated, holding steady at around 75 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, regardless of the surface weather. Excavating a dugout is not a casual endeavor. It requires industrial equipment, including jackhammers and tunnel-boring tools to carve out livable spaces in the rock. Waste rock is removed using blower trucks and massive machines that resemble oversized vacuum cleaners mounted on vehicles. Once the space is cleared, the walls are often left unfinished, showing the natural texture of the sandstone. Electricity and plumbing have to be painstakingly rooted underground, and ventilation shafts are strategically positioned to prevent carbon dioxide buildup. Some residents have expanded their homes into sprawling underground complexes, complete with wine cellars and art galleries. Even public spaces like churches, hotels, and bars have been carved into the hillsides. Despite the environment, Coober Pedy is home to about 2,000 people from over 40 different nationalities. Many came in search of opal wealth, while others stayed for the stark beauty and solitude. And mining does remain a cornerstone of Coober Pedy's economy. The search for opals continues both commercially and recreationally, with permits allowing tourists to try their hand at noodling, that's sifting through mine tailings for overlooked gemstones. Tourism has also become a significant industry, with visitors that are drawn to the unique underground accommodations, opal shops, and cinematic landscapes that have served as backdrops for films like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome and Pitch Black. Number 1. Mont Saint-Michel. Perched on a small, rocky island in the Bay of Normandy, Mont Saint-Michel stands as one of the most unusual places to imagine a building, let alone a monastic complex. The island, just under 1,000 feet from the mainland at high tide, is a labyrinth of narrow streets and steep walls that rise out of the water to a 302-foot peak. To understand the challenges of constructing and maintaining this abbey and its surrounding monasteries, one first must consider the geography. Mont Saint-Michel's location is as extraordinary as it is inhospitable. It's situated in the bay at the mouth of the Connaughton River. The island is surrounded by shifting tides that vary by up to 46 feet. This dramatic fluctuation between high and low tides has kept the island isolated for most of its history. The approach was treacherous, and only those who timed their arrival correctly could reach the island safely. To add to the challenge, the island sits atop a mass of leucogranite, an unyielding rock that, while strong enough to resist erosion, makes the terrain extremely difficult to work with. Well, how the hell do you build a monastery in a place like this? Well, the answer lies in creativity, labor, and the indomitable will of its creators. Construction began as early as the 8th century, but it wasn't until later that complex truly took shape, with the abbey towering above the rest of the island. The monks and the builders had no easy access to tools or materials, so much of the construction had to be done with whatever could be hauled up the steep incline or brought in during low tide. The causeway, which was uncovered only at low tide, became the primary route for workers and materials. Yet even during these low tide moments, the access was narrow and dangerous. Large rocks were hauled in from the site for foundations, while timber and other materials were loaded onto small barges. Even with all this, building on the island was a slow, constant process, as the harsh tides and rocky terrain posed nearly constant threats to all the work. Today, though, visitors who wish to reach Mont Saint-Michel can still experience the difficulty of arriving there. The bridge connecting the mainland to the island was raised in 2014 to allow the tides to flow freely around the mount and help combat silting. The new causeway ensures that people can cross at any time, but the island is still cut off from the mainland during high tide, making access challenging in some conditions. Visitors have to walk or take a shuttle from the parking area about 1.5 miles away, crossing a causeway that's still vulnerable to tides. The causeway itself remains a reminder of the impossible location, as it seems like a narrow thread connecting the mount to the mainland, surrounded by vast stretches of sand and water. But it still is a beautiful place. Thanks for exploring with me, guys. I'll see you next time. Thank you to our channel members.